My apologies for the video. I started a couple, like a slide or two late, but I forgot. So just you can watch the link within the Google Slides guided notes, and you can get the pieces you missed. But I asked my second hour class, when did you guys first start talking about photosynthesis in school? And I heard a couple of people throw out like elementary school, and I heard someone say like second grade. Okay, maybe it's sooner than that, maybe it's but a long time ago, right? And it's not the one and only time you've ever talked about photosynthesis, and the idea is each time we talk about it, we can add another layer of complexity and better understanding of the big picture. So what we know to be true about photosynthesis, and even back to say the second grade, we think is like, oh, well, obviously, but someone had to figure it out. And we didn't figure it out until like the 1600s. So I'm not saying that we're going to test on these scientists' names this year. I am going to tell you right now that in the past, I have asked students scientists' names on photosynthesis. I've asked about these three scientists. Whether we're going to do it this year or not, that's a conversation that the biology department still needs to have. But I'm telling you, last year, I asked questions about these three scientists. So it's possible. So back in the 1600s, there was a guy by the name of Jean-Baptiste von Helmont. And I actually did a little reading on him like a day or two ago. He was actually on house arrest when he did this experiment during the Spanish Inquisition. So the Inquisitions were when like the church like arrested people. The church arrested him and locked him up in his house for basically doing science. So while he was locked in his house for doing science, no, that's not really it. The reason he was on, you go on house arrest by the church is because you went against the teachings of the church. So like Galileo Galilei was also on house arrest by the church because he went against the teachings of the church during the Inquisition. But so he was on house arrest, and while he was on house arrest, he came up with this experiment, and he did it during his house arrest. So prior to von Helmont, the kind of common thought about plants is we know that they grow, and then they get bigger, and they gain mass, right? They get heavier. The common thought was that they absorb nutrients from the soil, and that's where the mass of that big oak tree in your backyard came from, was the soil. So von Helmont did an experiment. And he started with a small willow seedling, a small willow tree, and some dry soil, and he put it in a pot. And for 5 years, he did nothing but add water to that. And the willow tree grew, and it got heavier, like trees do when they grow. At the end of 5 years, he went and he found the weight of the tree. He took the soil, he dried the soil out again. Start with dry soil, end with dry soil so we can compare the mass of the soil, not like how much water is in the soil, we want just the soil. So he dried it out. And he found that his plant started at about 5 pounds, ended right around 170 pounds. He found his plant got heavier. Not a shock. Trees get bigger. They gain mass. They get heavier. That wasn't a surprise. And again, prior to this, the scientific community was under the understanding that mass would have come from the soil. So then he took the soil, he had about 200 pounds of soil when he started, and when he went through and he found the weight at the end, it was lighter. But it was about 60 grams lighter. You say, is 60 grams a lot? Well, a nickel is about 5 grams. A nickel's about 5 grams. So 60 divided by 12, or 5 is 12. So if you were to take 12 nickels and put them in one hand, out of 200 pounds, that's how much weight the soil lost. So did the soil lose some weight? Yeah. Is 12 nickels worth of weight significant when we start with 200 pounds? No, that's pretty insignificant. So where did the 165 pounds, because it started at 5 and ended at 170, where did that 165 pounds of weight come from if it didn't come from the soil? And he concluded that it came from the water, because that's the only thing he added. Now, he didn't know about the carbon dioxide piece, so his conclusion isn't 100% accurate. It's a combination of water and carbon dioxide. is where that weight came from. But he didn't know about the carbon dioxide. So not 100% accurate, but it's a starting point. Now, if we were going to go through and look at which of these two, where did that 165 mostly come from? I think nowadays, I'm pretty sure, I tried looking quick, but I couldn't find it. I think scientists are under the understanding that most of that weight actually comes from the carbon dioxide, not even the water itself. But that's what he concluded. Okay, so von Helmont said that the plants need water, and that's where the mass came from. 100 and some years later, there's a scientist by the name of Joseph Priestley. And Joseph Priestley did a different experiment with plants. So he started with a pretty common thing that people knew about, even back in the 1770s, that if you take a candle and you put a jar, and take a jar and you turn a jar over it, what happens to the candle? It goes out because it ran out of oxygen. Okay? They knew that in the 1770s. They knew that candles go out in a jar because they run out of oxygen. Now that's a combustion reaction. So let's quick talk. What does combustion need? In order for you to burn something, a candle, you need a campfire. What do you need in order for combustion to occur? You need, what's that? You need oxygen. You need some type of ignition source or some activation energy. So like if you're burning a log, the fact that the log next to it is burning starts that burning of the log, or you a match, right? So we need initial heat source, activation energy. We need some oxygen, and the obvious, if we're talking about a campfire, you need something to burn, right? You need wood. If we're talking about a candle, so fuel. And if we're talking about a candle, the wax is the fuel. So it's burning wax. So you need fuel, you need oxygen, and you need some ignition source. So the candle is burning, we're good in that part. We need oxygen, we need wax. But what happens when the jar is, the candle goes out because we run out of oxygen. Still wax, ran out of oxygen. Okay. So what Priestley did is he did that experiment, that's his control group. In his experimental group, he did the same thing. He took a candle in a jar, but this time he took a hunk of a mint plant, or a mint sprig, is what they say. And he lit a candle in a jar that had a plant in it, and he put the jar over it. And instead of that candle going out, that candle stayed lit for, according to the diagram, for several days. I always question, like, how big is this candle? Like, what kind of candle can burn for days and days and days? I don't know. But that's what they say. I also don't know, like, how big was this piece of mint? Was this like a mint sprig like this big, and it kept the candle burning, or was it like this big, and the candle, I don't know. I don't know the details of it, but his experiment is documented, and in his journals he talked about this. And if we were to go through and look at them, the candle stayed lit for multiple days. Well, if the candle didn't go out this time, that must mean there's still some oxygen in there because it's still burning. And the only thing different between his experimental group and the control group was the fact that there's a plant in it. So he concluded that plants must give off the oxygen, that's why that candle is still burning. So Priestley said plants give off oxygen. That piece right there. A couple years later, Jan Ingenhousz took Priestley's experiment and he repeated it. Mint sprig candle jar. But now what he did differently is he put one group in light and he put one in the dark, and he compared light versus dark. And what he found was that the candle that was in the light, the flame was still going after 7 days, according to this diagram. Days later, it was still burning, so the plants were producing oxygen. However, if we took that the experimental group, and we put in the dark, the flame went out. So they both have plants. Ingenhousz said that, Priestley said that plants produce oxygen, and if they produce oxygen, both candles should be lit. However, the ones in the dark went out. So what Ingenhousz found is that plants need that light in order for photosynthesis to occur, because the candle in the dark went out. Plants need water, oxygen is released by plants when in the light. That's the combination that those three have. Now, different types of organisms go through photosynthesis. We often overgeneralize and say plants. Plants are some species that photosynthesize. They aren't the only species that photosynthesize. So any organism that goes through photosynthesis is referred to as an autotroph, and autotrophs are self-feeding. And it says some forms of bacteria. Not all bacteria, but some forms of bacteria go through photosynthesis. Okay? So plants, plants, algae, and some bacteria go through photosynthesis. They take energy from the sun. They convert it into chemical energy. In the video that I showed you on Friday, they talked, like this image, the like middle bottom is of the cells, right? When we were in the dewdrop, we went past the plant and there was a plant cell, and all those little green circles, those are chloroplasts. And then we went into the chloroplast, the machinery that converts that chemical energy from the sun, or that energy from the sun into chemical energy. Okay? Now, during that video, and I think it was right about the time where I paused it or I stopped it for the day, they do the bowling ball thing? Did you do the bowling ball thing? No? Okay. So right at that, it was right about that time. Take a bowling ball on a long string, and swing it back and forth. It's called a pendulum. Okay? If you take the bowling ball, the pendulum, and you hold it up to your face and you let it go, the ball is going to swing away, it's going to stop, and it's going to swing back. Will it hit you in the face or not hit you in the face? It won't hit you in the face. Why? It's a scientific theme or idea that comes back time and time again in science. It's called conservation of energy. So conservation of energy is this idea that we can't create energy and we can't destroy energy. So if the bowling ball is touching my nose and I let it go, it can't come back farther or higher, because that would mean it has more energy than it started. Now it actually comes up a little bit short, because during the process air resistance is going to slow it down. There's going to be a little bit of friction in the rope or the string, and it'll actually get a little bit shorter. Okay? So conservation of energy says we can't create energy and we can't destroy energy. We just transform it from one form to the next. So that bowling ball, if I were to push it, now it's going to whack me in the face. But that's because I inputted some additional energy. I did some work on that bowling. When we talk about conservation of energy, that's true here. When we talk about the light energy coming into the plants, it converts it or transforms it into a different form of energy. It makes something that we refer to as glucose, which is a form of chemical energy. So here's a balanced equation again. The way this is displayed here is like I have it on the board, that in order for the chemical reaction to occur, we must have light. If there is no light, no reaction occurs, no photosynthesis occurs. We need that light in order for the chemical reaction to happen. So this is a balanced chemical equation. There's 6 carbon dioxide, there's 6 water molecules, there's 1 glucose molecule, and there's 6 oxygen molecules. I expect you to know this. I expect you to know what the reactants are. I expect you to know what the products are. I expect you to know the stuff on the left. I expect you to know the stuff on the right. Balanced chemical reaction it's called conservation of mass or matter. That I have to have 6 carbons on this side means I have to have 6 carbons on this side. If I have 12 hydrogen, I have to have 12 hydrogen. I have a combination of 18 oxygen, I have a combination of 18 oxygen. It's a balanced chemical reaction. Maybe you did in physical science, you'll do it in chemistry, but it's something that has to happen. Collectively, this chemical reaction creates glucose. Now, when we talk about mitochondria, we talked about they're the powerhouse of the cell, and it took chemical energy. This is the chemical energy, and it converts it. It doesn't destroy it. It converts it. Doesn't create it. It converts it into a different form of energy that we refer to in the cell notes, into free energy, ATP. It converts energy from glucose into ATP. That's what happens in our mitochondria. Here, light energy is converted into chemical energy, and that chemical energy is stored in the chemical bonds of this molecule. Now, glucose is this very generic term that we use for sugars. There's lots of different types of sugars. It's referred to as a simple sugar. It's referred to as a monosaccharide. Now, there's other sugars. This is glucose. You've maybe heard of maltose, lactose, fructose, lactose, sucrose. I'm out of oses. There's different types of sugar. This is just kind of this is the one we generally use because it makes our equation really nice. One sugar molecule is called a monosaccharide. Mono meaning one, saccharide meaning sugar. One molecule of sugar is a monosaccharide. If you are eating breakfast in the morning and your Lucky Charms don't have enough sugar in them, and you decide to sprinkle an additional sugar on it, that's called sucrose. That's table sugar. Sucrose is actually two different monosaccharides put together called a disaccharide. Okay, it's a different type of sugar. It's two monosaccharides put together. Okay, this is a monosaccharide. We eat table sugar, which is disaccharide. Generally, our monosaccharides, disaccharides are very sweet. They're very sweet in flavor. That's why we put them on our cereal. Okay, you might have heard of high fructose corn syrup. Fructose is a form of monosaccharide. It's very sweet. It's very cheap to produce. So food manufacturers will use it as a sweetener because it's cheap. Not super healthy, but it is cheap to produce, and that's why they use it. Now, there's different types of monosaccharides, the disaccharides. If you take these monosaccharides and you put even more monosaccharides together, we get something called a polysaccharide. Poly meaning many, just like a polygon, right? Polysaccharide. Now, when we talk about polysaccharides in plants, there's two general classifications that we talk about. One form of polysaccharide in plant is cellulose. It's the cell walls that make up our plant cells. It's a complex carbohydrate. A bunch of monosaccharides stuck together gives us the structure. We don't digest and get a lot of nutrition out of cellulose. So I can't eat like a hunk of wood, be like, I'm good for the day. We don't get a lot of energy from it. We aren't very good at breaking those things down. Or even blades of grass, we don't do very well with getting a lot of nutrition out of it. Other organisms, like a cow, does a really good job of it. The other type of polysaccharide that plants have is something called starch. Right? We hear about starch. We think about starch when I think about starch. I'm going to rephrase that. When I think about potatoes, when I think about pasta. There's one other one that I was thinking of that I can't remember right now. Those are when we talk about that, those are also starches. Now starch, bread, that was the other one. When we talk about starch, starches don't tend to be as sweet, so the longer glucose chains or monosaccharides put together, more of those put together, the less sweet they get. Good for longer term energy though. I can eat like some pasta and it's going to last me longer than if I ate a spoonful of sugar in terms of giving me energy throughout the day. But that's a monosaccharide. It's a form of chemical energy that we use in our body. So how do they go through and they do it? The idea is they store that energy in chemical bonds. It's chemical energy. It takes energy, we store it in those chemical bonds. When we eat that plant then, we break those bonds and we convert it into free energy or ATP that our bodies can actually use. As a result, conservation of energy says I can't create nor destroy energy. I can just transform it from one form to the next. When I break these chemical bonds in cellular respiration, when I digest my food, some of that energy is lost, and it's air quote lost. It's not really lost. It's just converted into something else. It's a byproduct of heat. Okay. When you burn gas in your car engine, a lot of that energy of the combustion is heat and is actually not directly utilized in your vehicle. We transform energy, we don't create or destroy it. This process takes place in the chloroplast. Specifically, there's a pigment called chlorophyll that we'll talk about in just a minute that helps rearrange all these atoms. But we need that light energy in order to create that glucose. So when we talk about light, we got to take a step back and say if the main sun is the ultimate source of energy for all living things on this earth. The sun is the ultimate, the beginning. If we trace back energy of any living thing on earth, it originates from the sun. And the sun produces light. And it travels through the vacuum of space. It warms our space, or it warms the earth. But we can capture, plants can capture that energy. And if earlier today it was sunny and it was shining in the windows, what color of light does the sun produce? What color is the sunlight that comes through the windows if it was shining right now? In pictures, we often draw it as yellow. But does the sun really produce yellow light? What color of light does the sun produce? White. Good. It produces white light. And what colors are in white light? Think of color of the spectrum. Roy G. Biv. Is there red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet in white light? What is and what isn't in white light? Anybody? All colors of light combine to give you white. So when we were looking at some of you maybe put your phone screen, a white part of your phone screen under the microscope, you can see the three color pixels, red, blue, and green. When those three combine close enough together, we get white light. Okay? Now there's other colors in there, but if we get red, green, and blue, we get a pretty good white. It's not perfect. Okay? So what we can do is if we take a prism, earlier I was able to kind of do it, if we take a prism, we can actually go through and we can scatter the light, and we can kind of see that, right? There you can kind of see the Roy G. Biv, right? So you get the colors of the rainbow. So the sun produces red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. It produces all colors of the spectrum. When we think about plants, we generally think of plants being green because a lot of the leaves on plants are green. So what this graph shows us is here's the Roy G. Biv spectrum, and they have different wavelengths and different amounts of energy. There's a couple pigments found in plants. The major one is called chlorophyll. There's chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B. It's not the only pigments found in plants, but it's a big one. So if you ever get grass stains on your clothes, that's chlorophyll that you got on your clothes. It's chlorophyll. It's a pigment that's found in the chloroplast. So if we were to go through and look at an absorption spectrum, so what colors are absorbed, or you could think of it as like sucked in, like it's sucking in what? If it has a high absorption, it means it's going to be absorbing or sucking in a lot of that. So if we look collectively at the chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, it absorbs a lot of blue and red colors. I'm sorry, blue and violet colors. If we look over on this end, we get a lot of red absorption too. And right here in the green range, we get next to zero absorption. So if light isn't absorbed, it's reflected. So it absorbs the blue and violet, it absorbs the red, and it reflects the green. So when we look at plants and we see green leaves, the reason why we see green is not that it's absorbing green, but it's reflecting the green. Very little photosynthesis occurs in that green range of the light spectrum. Most of it happens in the red or the blue-purple. Let me think. How long ago did you guys do some stuff in, was that 7th grade with fast plants and colored light with filters on the light? Did you guys do with the filters or no filters? Yes? A couple of you? Do you remember what colors you used for those color filters?
Black light.
What's that?
Wasn't it black light?
purple. Only purple? I don't know.
There was red too.
There was red?
Yeah,
Was there green as well?
I think so.
Some say yes, some say no. Okay, it was a long time ago. We don't remember. There was different colors though, right? And then the idea is, I'm assuming you look to see if certain colors, they grew better. Okay? Now, given the choice, let's say it was red, green, and purple. Green would have probably grown the worst because it doesn't, chlorophyll doesn't absorb much green. Okay? Now, most of the year, most of the growing season, our plant leaves are green. However, right around the time of fall, like a month within the last month, we get the fall colors. And when we get fall colors, we get less greens, and we get more reds, yellows, and oranges. And brown, right, because they die. But in the process of it, we get a lot of reds, oranges, and yellows. So what happens is chlorophyll is not the only pigment found in plant leaves. It's a big one. It's huge. It's really overpowering. It's dominant. But there's other pigments there. One of them is called carotene. And if you think of carotene, you think about carrots, also have carotene in it. And it is orange. It's an orange pigmentation. Now, again, there's still other ones. But what happens when the fall colors, days get shorter, light gets less, the chlorophyll starts to kind of weaken and not be as strong and as dominant, and these reds and oranges start to be the dominant pigment, which is why we start to see those coloration in those leaves for a while before they drop down. But chlorophyll doesn't absorb much. It reflects a lot of green. When we talk about what things you should know in terms of structures, you should know what the structures of the chlorophyll are. So chloroplast is a membrane-bound organelle. By definition, a eukaryotic cell is a cell that has membrane-bound organelles. Chloroplasts are one of them. And you should know that there's a membrane, inner and outer. Okay, great. Inside, there's something called the stroma. It's the fluid. The stroma is like the cytoplasm. It's the fluid that fills the space. The cytoplasm fills the space of a cell. The stroma fills the space of a chloroplast. Then we have all these discs, these stacks. Each individual stack is called a thylakoid. You put a bunch of thylakoids together, you call it a granule. That's the big thing that I want you to know for these. Most of the photosynthesis occurs in these stacks, in the thylakoids, or in the stroma, in the fluid on the outside. Now, what really happens is there's something called the light-dependent and light-independent reactions, and it's one of those things that we could get into a lot of details talking about chloroplasts, but we're not going to do that at this point. We just need you to know the major reactants and products. Tomorrow we're going to do another activity kind of reinforcing photosynthesis. We're going to do a lab on Thursday. And then kind of in the back of your mind, we're testing at the end of next week or the beginning of the Thanksgiving week. I originally said like that Monday, Tuesday, Thanksgiving. It might be, or we might move it up a couple days before that. We'll kind of have to see how the unit shakes out. But just kind of be thinking about that in the next week and a half. We're going to be testing again on photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So keep that in mind as we move ahead here. With that, I think that's a good point to stop. Have a great day, everyone, and we will see you tomorrow.